Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The 2008 to 2013 Global Political Agreement that was signed December 2008 by Zanu PF, MDC Changirai, MDC Mtambara, and on behalf of SADC by President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa, which gave birth to the GNU, Government of National Unity, that lasted 2008 to 2013. The primary purpose of that GNU was to implement the democratic reforms to stop what had happened in that year, 2008 elections. Unfortunately, not even one token reform was implemented. And this is why, to this day, we still continue to have rigged elections. So tonight we'd like to explore why not even one token reform was implemented in that golden opportunity, the window to implement reforms. Welcome, Benjamin. I don't know whether you had a chance to read through the Global Political Agreement.
Yes, I got. Well, it was a while back when I actually read through it, and some things are still fresh in my mind anyway. So, my take on the GNU period, and what people say, a lot of Zimbabweans are quite content with the GNU period. Hence, you find, a lot of individuals, if you were to ask them, they would say, that was one of our best times, and they would jump to the news that there is a GNU that is going to return. That is why even a lot of political analysts, they want a GNU or some form of transitional government. But many, like you say, have failed to understand the document and what exactly it was about, the primary purpose and the primary task, the way
I don't know what has happened there, Ben. We can't hear you, but I'll continue. This is the document, that Global Political Agreement. What it says in its preamble is very clear. We, the parties to this agreement, concerned about the recent challenges that have fallen, that we have faced as a country, and the multiple threats to the well-being of our people, and therefore determined to resolve this permanently. That says it all. The recent challenges, for those of you who may have forgotten, was the 2008 March vote, followed by the runoff 3 months later in June. Those were the recent challenges. The whole electoral process had been was so flawed that SADC and the AU, for the first time in Zimbabwean history, refused to accept Zanu PF's claim that the party had won the elections. For those who can't remember what happened, here is a video clip of what happened that year. Or rather, here is Mnangagwa boasting of what he did that year.
2008 patakaita ma-elections pakaposa papinda Tsvangirai ndandiri election agent ya-president. Ma-results abuda tiri pa-party headquarters vamutasa vanga vari secretary vedu ve-administration vamutasa muripi ndafona ndiri kwarusapi komogwenda kwarusapi seka ma-results achibuda kudai vanga aiwa zvako izvo Mnangagwa ndezvako endaenda kumusha ofisi vanga vabisa zvinhu zvavo zvose watofunga kuti zani yadini yaparara. President ofona zvakamira sei kati ndomamira zvakaita takatodini katida sei manje mama ndikati abvudzai baba nditaure navo baba gadzirai politburo cabinet musarangarira zvimwe zvipi gadzirai chi cabinet asi nangoda kuti muzive kuti 2008 ma-results abuda vamutasa vakatiza.
As a country we face a generational transition. Vana vesa vari kuma below 35, they are crying out for help. The country is in a mess. Arusuru, we know we are inheriting a mess. We know this country has been left with nothing.
I'm assuring you that starting from tomorrow, you'll see a different nation from what you have seen or read on the news about these results and everything. Where we are going ahead there, the situation will be very different. What we said to our people, they could not see with their own eyes. We are going to act as we see it fit. We are prepared to go the whole distance.
The recent challenges. The recent challenges could be put in two groups. The first one is what happened following the March vote. The March vote was the nearest Zimbabwe had ever got to holding free, fair, and credible elections. SADC ran up to those elections and put enormous pressure on Zanu PF to implement a number of electoral reforms, one of which was that votes must be counted at the polling station and the results announced there. And the March vote is what Mnangagwa was talking about. That when the results started coming out, it was clear Zanu PF was losing big time. And some of the leaders, Zanu PF leaders, including the gentleman he was talking about, Didmas Mutasa, had realized that Zanu PF had lost and they packed their bags and were ready to go. And according to some sources, including Professor Ibo Mandaza, Robert Mugabe himself had accepted that Zanu PF had lost, and he and his wife we're going to go for a break. In stepped Mnangagwa. He stopped the counting of the results and took over the work of ZEC. He went on to count the results of 5 million votes in 5 to 6 weeks and announcing the results in beats and drums. And the last result that was to be announced was the presidential. And during that period, he had managed to whittle down Morgan Tsvangirai's win to 47%, just enough to force the runoff. And what happened then during the runoff is what we saw in the video there. That was Operation Mafotera Papi, where Zanu PF, headed by Mnangagwa himself, headed by the police, the army, the CIO, the prison services, the war veterans, went out to punish ordinary Zimbabweans for having rejected Zanu PF in the March vote. Those are the recent challenges that we're talking about here. Then, as you well know, the GNU did not stop the blatant cheating and the violence. And this is why we are where we are today.
Yeah, sorry about the internet connection earlier. It's when you then look at the entire video, the one that you showed, you get that sense of disgust and hurt. It's a painful period, that many Zimbabweans went through, especially those in the rural areas that had sacrificed a lot, to actually vote the opposition, into power, because basically the country was no longer, in a good space. Triple C MDC, because they're just the same. They have the same thing. It's just the change of the name. They ruined people's hopes, not once, but since the very beginning. They have dropped the ball. They have left their primary purpose, which even in their name says change, democratic change. Democratic change, how? It's unforgivable that each and every time they just keep on dragging people through, a useless process called an election, or so-called election process in Zimbabwe, which we all know is not free, fair, and credible. Why? Because they forgot to do their job once again. Their primary purpose, as even in the name, like I said, suggests, is to implement democratic reforms, to ensure that the political environment in Zimbabwe is free and fair for all, so that everybody can compete freely and have an equal opportunity, as the agreement for the GNU stated. They didn't do any of that. Fast forward Okay, let's forget about the GNU, some may say. They have been elected as MPs, and at no given time did they table any reform. None. We are talking of guys that were, everybody has been in parliament. Chamisa has been in parliament for a long time. BT, parliament. Even the new guys, the Father Mayeres, they've been in parliament. Have they ever tabled any reform? None. Reforms are spoken when it's campaign time on the podium, telling people and giving people false hope and lying to the people. We have a problem, and the more we could, we don't want to face the truth as Zimbabweans, to say we have a useless opposition. The current crop of opposition are greedy and incompetent individuals willing just to look out for themselves. If we fail to see that by now, we are in this position because we deserve it.
Well, yesterday we played this video, which was filmed during the elections of 2013. And as you will see in the video, those elections were blatantly rigged by Zanu PF. They may not have used the same wanton violence of 2008, but they blatantly cheated in those elections. Just watch the video.
Then give the statement president. Which I can take what gender we How can we cheat blatant like this? How can we cheat like this?
There are some buses which are here.
Two buses there. One street in Mount Pleasant. One street. I think we shouldn't allow this. Officer, we don't want to be accused of disruptiveness, but this is not on. We can't allow this. Ask anyone which clean show van. Ask this one, where does he stay in Mount Pleasant?
I will pay to my seniors at Mount Pleasant.
All right, I'm going there. Yeah. But you can see it's written about it.
Yeah, but we'll take note of it.
We
But
can't.
you don't take note of them. Stop around.
That's why
Stop.
Stop around. Because this is not on, that we can have this blatant cheating. From the raw areas, yes. Yeah. Taken to think. And then post me as officers. They've been passed by those buses, as you can see. As one of them, a single address in Mount Pleasant. Just one. You need a bus to come from Morris Depot. Morris Depot is just across the road. You need a bus to come from Morris Depot.
But their sleeves retain
So why were they carrying with buses?
Just take a sample of 5. Go to the voters room with the sleeves. You find them not in the voters room.
They're not in the voters room.
But their sleeves are retain present, so we don't have the powers. So
When you are recruited, you have to shave your head into the police.
So you think they are in the police in a
They're
role?
not genuine.
Not genuine.
Those fake ones that like reacting for special.
You can stop the video there. The point has been made. We went through the GNU, 5 years of the GNU. In the first elections we held post the GNU, they were rigged, blatantly rigged. So we can conclusively say, while we have said at the beginning of the video, the primary task of the 2008 to 2013 GNU was to implement the democratic reforms. And at the end of the GNU, as we can see, no meaningful reforms had been implemented. And hence the reason why Zanu PF was able to blatantly rig those elections. Ben, I would like now to quickly explore the various stakeholders and the role they played during the GNU. Let's start with Zanu PF. Do you want to take that one?
Please explain further.
Yeah, I mean, in the GNU, the Government of National Unity, we have agreed that not even one token reform was implemented. What role did Zanu PF play in that failure to implement reforms? Then we'll go on to what role did MDC play in failing to implement end of the democratic reforms? Then we'll go to the people themselves. Then I wanted to go to SADC.
During the GNU, for Zanu PF, I believe it was business as usual. They didn't have any, role or major role to play in terms of implementing, reforms. None whatsoever, because they knew if they implemented reforms or if they pushed for reforms, they were putting themselves out of office. So they would have been very, very content, keeping the status quo. So you cannot then, say, why did Zanu PF not do anything? Zanu PF didn't do anything because they wanted to keep the situation as it was. And the best thing they could do to facilitate keeping the situation was to make the other parties happy. And they did. They built Morgan Changirai his $4 million house, and he was happy. They gave, the opposition ministers, deputy ministers, vehicles, loans, and they were very happy, and they became very content. So Zanu PF did what Zanu PF does the most: keep the status quo.
Totally agree with you. It was not in the interest of Zanu PF to implement any of the reforms. We must remember here that the dictatorship was a Zanu PF creation. And it was in their interest to keep it. Why would Zanu PF want to dismantle the dictatorship? Particularly when they are looking at, they would want post the GNU to stay in power. So yes, Zanu PF primary motivation was how can we make sure that the opposition, MDC, forget about reforms. And you were right. They bribed the opposition leaders to make sure that they forget about implementing reforms. Mugabe did what he did with his own party soon after independence. Load them with trappings of high office. And as we know, throughout Mugabe's rule, his cabinet was full of yes men. It was so frustrating, in fact, that Margaret Dongo at one point, when she left the party, she accused the party of being made of yes men, as she called it, because none of the Zanu PF ministers, deputy ministers, MPs, etc., ever challenged Mugabe. And when MDC guys came in, Mugabe did exactly the same thing, bribed them. And that was the end of the story. So in this particular case, we have got to understand that no meaningful reforms were implemented because Mugabe bribed the opposition. While they had their snouts in the feeding trough, they forgot about reforms. Some people were asked, Zanu PF, were asked during the GNU, why are MDC leaders not implementing reforms? And they openly boasted about it. Mazwana MDC adziza kuchikanyerere. They're enjoying the trappings of high office. They're never going to implement any reforms. The next one, what was the role of SADC, Ben?
I mean, SADC, you know, they are the, you know, the ones that brought the two together. The opposition, you know, the MDC, MDC, Tambara, GNU, and so forth, and ZANU together, because, you know, the situation in Zimbabwe, the wanton violence was no longer, you know, it was unsustainable. Basically, people were now being harassed and people were being killed. So they brought them together to try and, you know, get the parties to talk amongst themselves and to fix the political situation in their country. You know, that was their major role, and to ensure that whoever does not play nice with the other, you know, they could step forward and go and tell them. Basically, they were the guarantor of this whole, you know, GNU. They were the pillar, you know, they were the chairman. You have to go and tell them if something is not working out. You know, that was their purpose. They would not force anybody. They had no hand to play besides to protect the interests of the people and the interest of the GNU, which was, you know, implement the reforms, you know, fix your political situation, dialogue amongst yourselves, and find a way forward. So SADC, you know, for me, during the GNU, they played a very, very important role. They gave Zimbabweans a chance to fix their political system. They gave Zimbabweans, secondly, you know, to fix their problems. There are other problems, but the major problem was the political wanton violence that was happening, you know, in front of the whole world, and they had to step in.
Well, SADC having forced Zanu PF to agree to sign the global political agreement and the formation of the GNU, they were the guarantor of that agreement. And the SADC appointee was South Africa. If you were to go down to the bottom of the agreement, you find that President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa signed on behalf of SADC. And so you find a South African minister, Minister Lindiwe Zulu, was the one who was involved in the GNU in Zimbabwe. And throughout the 5 years, SADC, and particularly Minister Lindiwe Zulu, reminded Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends that they must implement the democratic reforms. They must follow the roadmap, the global political agreement roadmap. This is the roadmap we're talking about. The concern about the recent challenges and the determination to resolve them permanently. And every time she reminded Tsvangirai and company, she was ignored. Indeed, there is anecdotal evidence that MDC leaders would go and tell their Zanu PF counterparts that Lindiwe, Zulu, and her colleagues are putting them under pressure to implement reforms. This actually was the reason why Robert Mugabe, at one point, told then South Africa President Jacob Zuma to tell his street woman that she should not interfere in Zimbabwe's affairs, meaning Minister Lindiwe Zulu. It was undiplomatic language, totally uncalled for, but that's how exasperated Zanu PF was with Minister Lindiwe Zulu. She was trying to get MDC guys to implement the reforms. In fact, towards the end of the GNU, when SADC leaders realized that no meaningful reforms had been implemented, they had a special SADC summit in Maputo in June 2018. And they advised both Zanu PF and mostly, of course, Morgan Tsvangirai and company that they should not go into those 2013 elections until meaningful reforms were implemented. Their advice was ignored. But they gave up completely when they learned later on that MDC in the 5 years of the GNU had not submitted even one reform proposal. Not even one. That's when SADC leaders gave in. So those who have again and again tried to blame SADC for failing to make sure that reforms were implemented, they clearly were not following what was going on. SADC played their part. It's just that they had no one in the GNU in the form of the MDC two factions, MDCT and MDCN leaders who were prepared to listen to them in terms of pressuring them to implement reforms. That is why no meaningful reforms were implemented. And we ended up with a situation where at the end of the golden period of the GNU, not even a token reform had been implemented. I was going to ask you, Ben, I don't know whether you'd want to talk about the role that the people played, particularly as regards the 2018 constitution, and whether or not that was a democratic constitution.
You know, when you talk of the people, you know, I want to talk about the general, you know, topic about the reforms. You know, a lot of people do not understand what reforms need to be implemented, or even, you know, what is it about the reforms just in general? A lot of people do not understand. You know, I was just reading a comment there from Edwin that says, you know, you guys are still talking about reforms. I'm beginning to doubt your intelligence. How do you then expect to fix a country that is in a political mess if you do not fix the system? And by fixing the system, it means turning it around, reforming it. How do you expect to go about fixing it if you do not take that responsibility? SADC, you know, has always been saying the same thing. Your elections are not meeting the the international standards. Your elections are not even meeting the requirements of your constitution, which means our elections are below par, are illegal as far as the constitution of Zimbabwe says. So you find each and every time we're having the same elections under the same conditions and expecting a different result. As the people, that says a lot about us. What type of people are we? Are we thinkers? Are we doers? Or we have somebody think for us and we act according to what they have said, no matter how foolish it is. And I think it's the latter. We have given so much power and free will to the politician that we ourselves have failed to think. If Chamisa is to stand up and say, let's all go to the toilet, we will all go, regardless of whether you really want to use it or not. It is what it is. I mean, it may sound, but it is what it is. That is the truth. We are failing to think for ourselves. We could have also pressured our politicians to say, where are the reforms that you promised us? Where is the change that you have promised us? So we played a good part by keeping quiet and showing that they can easily get away with it. And here we are. So we are partly to blame for whatever is happening in Zimbabwe. Not only the politician, but the citizen as well, for keeping quiet. You know, they say if you keep quiet, you are in agreement to whatever is going on. And this is what Zimbabwe is doing, each and every one of us.
Well, the people of Zimbabwe were involved in the GNU, particularly when it comes to writing the new constitution, the 2013 constitution. The tragedy for Zimbabwe is that the people did not understand what the constitution was saying. They were made to believe whatever the MDC leaders told them. The truth of the matter is that constitution is weak and feeble. And that's the reason why when it came to the 2013 elections, Zanu PF was able to blatantly rig. Some people said, oh no, it's because they didn't implement the reforms. Yes, the constitution itself, even if it was strong, it would have forced those reforms to be implemented. But because it is feeble, it failed to force any meaningful reforms. The people were told by Morgan Tsvangirai that the new constitution was an MDC baby. Well, if it was an MDC baby, one would expect the MDC would have a democratic constitution. The truth of the matter is, Zanu PF, specifically Robert Mugabe, dictated that constitution as Paul Mangwana, the MP, the Zanu PF MP, who was the co-chair of the committee, the parliamentary committee that drafted that constitution, later posted soon after the referendum of March 2018 that Mugabe dictated that constitution. So this is again another area where the people themselves were in their ignorance with their own worst enemy. The people had not taken the trouble to understand what the reforms were, how they were supposed to be implemented, what a democratic constitution should be, and the weaknesses of the constitution that was put before the nation. And so in the end, as we stated at the very beginning, the primary purpose of the 2008 to 2018 GNU was to implement the democratic reforms which were designed to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. At the end of the GNU, not even one token reform was implemented. And hence we are where we are today. I hope this will form a basis for some people who had not understood what the GNU was about to begin to understand what the GNU of 2008 was really about and why we are where we are. Tomorrow we'll pick up on this theme of elections, reforms, and maybe looking at what can we do now? What is the way forward? Thank you very much, Ben. And those of you who were able to join us tonight, thank you for joining us. And I hope you'll be able to join us again tomorrow. Same time, 7 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Zimbabwean time. Thank you and good night.